Killed. Our correspondent Barbara Platt-Usher is there with the latest.
Yes, there have been a number of protests here today, Hugh, including one that involved faith leaders who marched right up to this memorial site. The situation has largely stabilized, though, but attention is still very much focused on accountability. One of the officers was charged, and the Attorney General is saying that prosecutors are working as quickly as they can to see whether the other three who were involved in the arrest should be charged as well. But the unrest that began here is still rolling across the country.
Minneapolis is reclaiming the place that sent the city into spasms of anger and unrest. Smothering with flowers the spot where George Floyd stopped breathing, pinned down by a police officer's knee on his neck. It's become a pilgrimage site for those demanding justice for George.
Black lives! Black lives!
At the state capitol, a sit-in echoing the civil rights movement. 60 years later, still demanding equal justice for African Americans, especially an end to police brutality against black people. The Minnesota government has announced it will investigate the conduct of the state's largest police department, stretching back 10 years. In Houston, Texas, it seemed like the whole city had turned out to march for Mr. Floyd. Members of his family joined them. This is where he grew up and where he'll be buried. Packed streets in New York City, emptied out in recent months to contain the coronavirus pandemic, now full once again with protesters. The anger has taken a destructive turn here, as it has elsewhere.
I mean, unfortunately, there are people out here looting, but you can't tell angry people how they can be angry. You know, that's like telling the slaves not to burn down Master's house.
But this looked like more than protest about racial injustice. In Manhattan, bands of young people dressed mostly in black took advantage of the unrest to pillage stores that had been shuttered because of the coronavirus. Police struggled to respond, and the mayor imposed a curfew, a double quarantine. The vast majority of protests are peaceful, but it doesn't take much for the mood to change. Police have been responding with more and more force. And they have been attacked. In several cities last night, 4 were shot and injured in St. Louis.
Some coward fired shots at officers, and now we have 4 in the hospital. But thankfully, and thank God, they're alive. They're alive. But can we make some sense out of this? Can we make some sense out of this?
Take a knee!
Police are struggling to make sense of their role, to restore law and order, but also respond to the tragedy of Minneapolis.
We're appalled at what happened in Minneapolis. Period. But we gotta do better.
In that city, faith leaders made clear they were siding with those calling for justice. People are demanding that all of the officers involved in Mr. Floyd's arrest be charged. Accountability in this case might be the beginning of an answer, but only the beginning. Barbara Platt-Usher, BBC News, Minneapolis.